Welcome to The Explainer. So today, we are diving into the story of a cartoonist who basically became the king of the cubicle and then became a lightning rod for controversy.
Yeah, what did happen? You know, so many of us grew up with that comic strip. It totally defined office humor for a whole generation. But the story of its creator, Scott Adams, is, well, it's way more complex and, honestly, pretty surprising. Okay, so to really get the whole picture, you have to understand just how huge Dilbert was. We need to go back to a time when it wasn't just some comic strip, but like a cultural symbol for anyone who'd ever been stuck in a cubicle. So, Scott Adams himself was a former office worker at Pacific Bell, right? And he just perfectly channeled all the absurdities of corporate life into his art. By '96, his book, The Dilbert Principle, was a massive bestseller, and that really cemented him as the voice on the subject. The comic was just on this incredible upward trajectory all through the '90s. And get this, at its absolute peak, Dilbert was in 2,000 newspapers. 2,000 in 57 different countries. This wasn't just a popular comic strip anymore, it was a global phenomenon. Scott Adams became a household name, especially in the business world, but really everywhere.
And, he leveraged that success like a pro. He expanded the whole Dilbert brand into more books, a TV show, and he used it as a platform for his own commentary. But it was that commentary that would eventually lead to this huge, dramatic turning point.
And when I say turning point, I mean it was fast. It was decisive. Pretty much everything changed in a single day. So here's what happened. On his daily YouTube show, Adams was talking about a poll. Now, this poll was about the phrase, "it's okay to be white," which, has a complicated history often linked to online trolling and white supremacist groups. And when some black respondents in the poll disagreed with that statement, Adams' reaction was pretty extreme. His response was immediate and, yeah, incendiary. He straight up advised white people to segregate themselves. Of course, the backlash was intense. And afterward, Adams went on his website to try and reframe what he'd said. He claimed he was speaking in hyperbole, and that he was just giving a warning about what he saw as divisive group identities. But it was too late. The damage was done. The professional consequences came down so fast and so hard, it was like a tidal wave. Dilbert was basically wiped clean from the entire mainstream media landscape. Now, for most creators, a cancellation of that magnitude would absolutely be the end of the road. But for Scott Adams, he saw it as a chance to forge a totally new path. He just completely pivoted. He went from this huge mainstream audience to a direct subscription-based model. And he went to Locals, a platform that's really known for hosting people who've been, deplatformed or kicked off other major sites for their controversial views. So he gave his followers a couple of ways to get the new, what he called spicier and uncensored version of his work. He really leaned into that direct-to-consumer idea. And what's interesting is that this move tapped into a whole growing media world. You see platforms like Rumble, which hosts Locals, were seeing huge financial growth. They provided this ready-made and pretty profitable home for creators just like Adams. And Adams himself didn't frame it as a defeat at all. For him, he said it was a creative liberation. He was finally free from the rules and constraints of traditional media. So while all this was happening, this whole public reinvention of his career, his personal life was quietly entering its final and very private stage. He was very open about his battle with cancer, and it was that fight that eventually made him put down his pen for good and really, confront his own mortality. In his last days, his focus really shifted. It was about his legacy, and this pretty late-in-life turn towards spirituality. He even prepared one last message for all his followers. And that message, which was posted right after he passed away, was this really clear declaration of faith. I mean, it was a huge contrast to the public persona he'd had for decades as a pragmatist, a skeptic. And he didn't end with more controversy. He ended with something much simpler. Just a plea to his audience to be useful and to do some good in the world. So his story leaves us with this really complicated picture, doesn't it? You have the creator who made millions of people laugh at their own jobs. Then you have the provocateur who pushed away a huge chunk of his audience. And then at the very end, you have this man with a quiet message of faith. It really makes you wonder, right? Which one of those chapters is the one that's going to define his whole story?